Well, hello everyone. You saw the title, you saw the thumbnail, so you know that I am making some barbecue baked beans. Let's just get started. So I am I am turning on my stove, and I've got a nice beat up, stained, not dirty Dutch oven on the burner. So as you probably also saw from the title and or thumbnail, I'm making this because it's mostly hands-off cooking, it tastes really good leftover, and it's cheap, and it's also rather nutritious. You know, it's not the healthiest thing you could possibly eat, of course, but it's rather comparatively nutritious. Anyway, I'm making Brian Lagerstrom's recipe for barbecue baked beans, so I'm not going to go too much into the process of it, because I'm literally just making his recipe, but like with a couple minor changes because of ingredients I happen to have on hand, and I'm making a half recipe instead of a whole. So I'll link to his recipe. By all means, watch his video, follow his recipe, especially if you want to make a whole recipe. I'd say this half recipe, it makes, as a side dish, it makes like, I don't know, 10 servings. I made this as a side dish when I did indoor barbecue brisket last time, and it was delicious, so I thought I'd make it again as a main course with some cornbread. All right, so this is bacon ends and pieces. This is pretty much how I buy bacon, like unless I specifically need like good, you know, strips of bacon for a recipe or whatever. This is pretty much how I always buy my bacon now, because it is so much cheaper. This is actually a pretty like decent brand of bacon, and it was just over $3 per pound, which is like, that's what discount store brand bacon that doesn't taste very good and it's mostly fat, like that's what that price is. But you pay that same price for like really nice quality bacon. This is just the ends, literally the ends and the pieces. When they slice bacon, they cut off all the bits that don't make it into pretty strips, and they sell it at a discounted price like this. I don't technically need this because I have some frozen from the last time I bought it. I literally just bought this to show you guys what it looks like in its full form, but I will have a use for this later, and as long as I don't break the seal, it'll last a long time in my fridge. So yeah, these ends and pieces that I already had, I had previously put them in the freezer. Bacon freezes really well, by the way. I'm just gonna like break up any pieces that are like not quite little pieces. We want 3 ounces total for this recipe, which is like the equivalent of maybe 3 pieces of bacon. So I'm just gonna kind of guess. I'm just gonna kind of eyeball. This right here is like 1.5 pounds of bacon. So I'm only going to use a little bit of it, and I'm going to use bacon also in the greens. Anyway, as I mentioned in the very last upload that I did with this channel, I am going to be focusing a little more on recipes that help people save money and aren't too complicated to cook, because, you know, we all need to save time as well as money. And also I'm going to focus on you know, recipes or techniques for cutting down on food waste, which will also save you money. Because everybody's hurting right now. There's price gouging galore at the grocery store. Somebody turned that into a jingle. Ooh, see, look at this big, giant chunk of bacon. It's so thick. But yeah, this is what they had left over when they were slicing pretty pieces of bacon. And it's perfect for recipes like this, where you need to chop the bacon into little pieces anyway. You might as well just buy it already in little pieces. It's not going to be uniform or anything, but it really does not matter with this kind of recipe. All right, we need a little more bacon than that, and then we'll be set. Oop, here's another gnarly. It's like that's not even like a piece of bacon. But another way that you can save money in the kitchen is by eating beans. Like, unfortunately, if you're like me and your guts don't digest beans very well, you're going to have a hard time like eating a lot of beans. But I've been trying to eat more beans just because they are, they're great. They're basically a meat and a vegetable in one, nutritionally speaking. And there's a lot you can do with beans too. I'm trying to make sure I'm getting a good balance of like fatty pieces and meaty pieces in here. This might be like way more than 3 ounces. I honestly just eyeball it. Also, 3 ounces of meat's like a deck of cards. If I compacted this, it would be a little bigger than a deck of cards, so I'm gonna stop there. But another good way you can save money, like if you are a meat eater, is to use a cheaper cut of meat, like discount bulk bacon, or, you know, ground beef or chicken or something. And I use that as a seasoning, as a flavoring, rather than as the main thing you're eating. So I'm just going to put this in the Dutch oven. And while that bacon is rendering, I'm going to prep the other ingredients. One thing that really bothers me about more like professional style cooking shows, I know why they do it. It's for entertainment value, and it's just neater and tidier. I don't like how they like prep everything in advance before they cook and put it into all these little tiny containers. I always think as a home cook when I watch that, oh God, what a nightmare to have to like prep all of this in advance and waste a bunch of time. And then you have to like wash all those little containers afterwards. It's just not at all practical for the home cook. I'm a big proponent of prepping while cooking. I know that the bacon is going to take a few minutes to render, so instead of taking a few minutes before I even start cooking the bacon to chop my onion, my serrano chili, and my garlic, why don't I chop those things while the bacon is rendering? That way I can be more efficient and save a lot more time. Like, I understand if you're new to cooking, I do recommend prepping everything in advance before you get started, because it's bad if like your bacon's ready and then your onion's not, and then you get overwhelmed. I think I need a little more onion than that. The recipe calls for like a medium-sized white onion, and this is like a large-ish onion, so I want to do like a little less than half. Anyway, I'm going to save this half of an onion for other recipes, and I'm going to save these onion peels for stock. Just pop it in the freezer, and then when I'm ready to use them later, I will have them. Okay, onion is prepped. This is another part where I differ from Brian's recipe. He calls for jalapenos, but I'm using serrano because I happen to have a few serranos that are old that I need to get rid of. So serranos are hotter than jalapenos, and they have a bit of a different flavor. But my husband and I don't mind heat, and we like serrano flavor, so I'm just going to go ahead and use serrano. And it calls for garlic. The half recipe calls for 3 cloves, but these are very small, wimpy cloves. So I'm doing like twice as much. That was a potent serrano. The particulate from chopping it is like floating into my mouth right now. My throat is getting kind of scratchy. That's why I coughed just now. So I'm making beans, greens, and cornbread because the beans and the cornbread, as far as I'm concerned, that's a complete meal. That's a complete protein. Like the general, it never works out, the math never works out perfectly, but basically a legume plus a grain is, you know, more likely to get you closer to a complete protein. And corn is a grain, so, and flour also, wheat flour. So beans and the cornbread is a complete meal as far as I'm concerned. There's also already vegetable in there, because beans, again, they're sort of like meat and vegetable in one. I also think this kind of meal is great. It works for so many different people. Like, you can make gluten-free cornbread, and you can make this dish vegan quite easily. Just sub out the bacon with oil, and boom, it's vegan. There's also Worcestershire sauce in it, but sub that out with soy sauce if you want to do a vegan version. And the greens that I'm making can also very easily be made vegan. It's the simplest preparation for collard greens that I've ever made, by the way. Okay, now everything is prepped. I'll need another couple minutes. While my bacon is finishing rendering, I'm just going to talk you through all of the other ingredients that go into this. So the meat, the meat, ironically, the bulk, what gives this dish its main like substance is the bacon, the onion, jalapeno, and garlic, and the beans. The rest of this is just seasonings that are going to make it taste really, really good. So I think the biggest one here is ketchup. That's the base of a lot of barbecue sauces. We're basically making our own barbecue sauce here. Brown sugar, molasses, yellow mustard, ketchup, Mexican chili powder, black pepper, a little hot sauce. Tapatio is our favorite, so that's what I'm using. Cider vinegar and Worcestershire sauce. Again, if you're vegetarian, just use soy sauce. And yeah, for the exact amounts, just check out Brian Lagerstrom's video. And remember that I'm doing a half recipe. Oh, and I'm just going to note that in the past, all my videos, I tend to advocate for using dried beans instead of canned because dried are a lot cheaper. And also, I personally, I just don't like the flavor of canned food, if that makes any sense. It has this distinctive flavor that really puts me off. But if you're going to add a bunch of other very strong flavored things, and if you're going to bake it for an hour and a half, which is what we're going to do, canned beans do not bother me. And in fact, these canned cannellini beans, they're cooked to perfection in a certain way, and this recipe was designed for canned cannellini beans. And I don't think I can really replicate that with dried beans because I'm not experienced enough with beans and bean cooking to do that. And this dish, like what makes it really good is the texture. So I want to just make sure I get that right, and that's why I'm using canned beans. Also, one of the cans of beans is specified you keep the bean juice in there. It'll add body to the soup. Soup. It's really more like a very, very thick stew. And these I've strained the liquid out. Okay, I have added the onion and serrano, but I've held off on the garlic because that has a tendency to burn. I'm going to cook this until the veggies get soft. I'm holding off on adding any salt, by the way, because canned beans are salty. Some of these other condiments are salty, and bacon is salty. So, and I have lower levels of tolerance for salt than the average person, so I tend to salt my things less than what recipes call for. And that's another pet peeve I have about chefs or anyone with a cooking show. That's just like, oh, people who undersalt their food are peons. You don't know what you're doing. It's like, people have different tolerances, you know? Give me a break. Alright, it's ready to add the other ingredients. Try to balance my poor camera on the rickety tripod that might fall over at any minute. Yay! Ketchup. And yes, that is a lot of ketchup. Getting towards the end of this mustard. Tablespoon. Molasses is a really interesting ingredient. Unless you're like a big cook, you probably aren't going to use it much or have much of a use for it. And even I am a big cook, and even I don't use molasses that much. I tend to use it more in the winter time when I make like molasses cookies and desserts like that. But it is so sticky, and I don't have one of those push cups, so I usually don't bother measuring it. I just kind of eyeball it. That was 2 tablespoons. Ketchup will deglaze the pan a little. 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. I'm going to eyeball that too. I am going to measure the cider vinegar though, since that is potent. 2 teaspoons. And ditto for the Worcestershire. This stuff is very potent. I'll need a couple teaspoons of that too. Since I have my measuring spoon out, I might as well measure the hot sauce. And then just add extra anyway. 1/2 tablespoon of chili powder. This is where, like, if you're doing a vegetarian version, you could add a smoked paprika to approximate the flavor of smoky bacon. And some black pepper. I would say this smells really good, but my nose is stuffed up right now and running. I'm gonna go blow my nose. Now that I have blown my nose, I can confirm that it indeed smells really good. Alright, and now we can finally add the beans. So 1 with the cooking liquid, and 2 without. And then I'm supposed to add about 3/4 of a cup of water to this to thin it out a bit, because it will evaporate while it bakes uncovered in the oven. I'm just going to like approximate that while cleaning out the dregs in these cans. I'm going to bring this to a simmer, and then I'm going to put it in a 350-degree oven for 1.5 hours. And after a half hour of that cook time, I'm going to come back and start on the greens, because they take about an hour to cook. Because I have work to do. I'm doing this on a work day, by the way. I work at home as a freelance translator, so that gives me the ability to like cook dishes like this during my work day. But this sort of thing, this meal, the beans and the cornbread and the greens, this is something that you could totally like make when you have a day off and then eat the leftovers for several days after. It's quite good leftover. Okay, it is starting to simmer a little bit, so into the oven. What I'm doing, this is like a very, very simple recipe for greens, by the way. There are many other ways to make southern greens. If you're a southerner, please do not scream at me in the comments telling me I'm doing it incorrectly. This is the Joy of Cooking's version of it. Basically, I'm starting by making a bacon broth. This is about 8 cups of water, and this is, the recipe calls for 5 ounces of bacon, but again, because I don't have a scale, I'm just kind of eyeballing it. Maybe this is more than 5 ounces, but I certainly have enough bacon. Basically, you simmer this for about an hour to make a bacon broth, and you leave the bacon in there also. And then you cook the greens in that bacon broth, and it makes them taste delicious. And that's really all there is to it. It's just that and like some red pepper flakes and a little salt. There are definitely other ways of making this. This is not the only way. And if you're vegetarian, just skip this step and use vegetable broth. You could even, you know, just use chicken broth also. You don't have to make bacon broth. It just tastes really good. Okay, now you want it to simmer like this, partially covered, for about an hour. All right, these beans are looking nice and thick and glossy, and I'm gonna call them done.
What is it, Lili?
Okay, these are collard greens, and I should have made a note of this. It doesn't say anywhere on the labeling here, but I don't know how many pounds this is. I imagine each one of these is probably either 1 pound or 2 pounds. I'm guessing probably 1 pound. That would make a little more sense. I don't know, maybe they're 2 pounds each. Anyway, I need 3 pounds for this recipe, so either this is 2 pounds or 4 pounds. We'll split the difference and call it 3. I'm gonna wash and cut these. Okay, I've washed the greens. I said I was going to chop them, but I lied. I'm actually basically just going to take these center ribs out because they're very tough, and then just tear them with my hands and then toss them into the pot off camera where you can't see because I don't feel like moving my tripod while I'm cooking. Anyway, you can buy collards like pre-washed and pre-cut in plastic bags at the store. But I actually wouldn't recommend that because they come, like, they just chop them with these very thick fibrous stems intact, and you don't want the thick fibrous stems in there. I mean, I don't. You can technically eat them, but you're definitely going to have to cook them a lot longer. You can use any, assertive green, they're often called, very hard bitter greens, things like kale or mustard greens or collard greens, as I'm using here. The secret, actually, too, like, a lot of veggies, you don't want to overcook them, right? You learn after the fact, when you were a child, you were fed these mushy, overcooked Brussels sprouts and broccoli, and you thought that they were disgusting, and then you learned how to not overcook them, and now they taste delicious. But actually, counterintuitively, things like assertive greens, like collard greens, they actually taste good. Cabbage also, they actually taste really good if you cook them for a very long time. So that's what we're going to do here. The recipe says 15 to 45 minutes, so I guess that really just depends on, your personal taste. I'm basically going to cook them as long as it takes to cook the cornbread, which will probably be start to finish about 20-25 minutes. I'm going to be eating most of this leftover, and when I reheat it, it's going to cook more, so it's okay if I cook it a little less. Here, I'll show you what it looks like when I'm putting them in the water, in the bacon broth that I've made, basically. As you can see, it cooked down quite a bit, like a lot of the water cooked down, and that's totally fine. We just need enough to braise these greens, and the greens themselves will release water. Okay, all the collards are in there. I'm just going to try to make sure that they all get contact with the simmering water. Bacon broth, I should call it. And then the only other ingredient in here is some red pepper flakes. And that's like literally it. I mean, we'll season it later with salt when it's done cooking, but the bacon is very salty, so probably won't have to add much. So we simmer it partially covered until the greens are tender. So it says 15 to 45 minutes. It really just depends to your liking. Now that these beans have had a little chance to cool down a little bit, I'm going to taste them for seasoning. Yeah, those are damn good. I personally don't think they need any salt. My husband will probably add some when he eats his. Those are good in my view. So now, while the greens are cooking in the time it takes for them to cook, I'm going to make some cornbread. Okay, I have made cornbread at least once on this channel before, but I'll walk you through it again. It is one of the easiest breads to make. If you're a beginner level cook, for sure, just make cornbread. It's actually rather healthy too, like the cornmeal is pretty good for you. It uses 1 1/4 cups of stone ground cornmeal, 3/4 a cup of all-purpose flour, 1 to 4 tablespoons of sugar. I usually opt for 2. And then 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, some salt, 2 large eggs, 2/3 of a cup of buttermilk, 2/3 of a cup of regular milk, and then 2 to 3 tablespoons, I always use the larger amount of warm unsalted butter folded in at the end. And it's weird that you fold it in at the end, but something to do with hydration. Anyway, I've got the dry ingredients. Now it says to mix in another bowl, but I don't want to clean another big bowl, so I mix it in this Pyrex measuring cup. So I've got 2/3 of a cup of, let's put you in the camera so we can actually see what I'm talking about. I got 2/3 of a cup of regular milk already in there, and then I'm adding 2/3 of a cup of buttermilk. You don't have to use buttermilk, by the way, I know. So I'm getting 1 1/3 cups total of liquid here. That's how I'm measuring both of these. You don't have to use buttermilk if you don't want to, but it is such a wonderful product. I already used some of this to make biscuits a few days ago, and I have plans for most of the rest of it, but any that I don't use on time, I will freeze for later. Because if you're just going to make cornbread, frozen buttermilk is fine. And then 2 eggs, which even though they're price gouged at the moment, they're still pretty cheap as far as protein goes, I suppose. There's only 2 of them. You know, you can probably find some vegan recipes for cornbread that don't use eggs that might be cheaper. And if you want to, if you don't want to bother with buttermilk, it is more expensive than regular milk, and then you have to deal with the leftover buttermilk. Just use regular milk and substitute the baking soda with baking powder. So since I've mixed and measured everything in this one thing, that's 1 less bowl to clean. And then you just make a little well and you pour it in. Another great thing about cornbread, if you're a beginner level baker, is you don't really have to worry so much about overworking this batter because cornmeal does not have gluten. So really just whisk it, stir it with whatever utensil you have until there aren't any lumps. And it doesn't take that long, especially if you have a nice whisk already combined. And then this is the weird part where you stir in some melted butter at the end. You know, if you want to save a dish and a step, I have melted that butter in the Pyrex measuring cup that I used for the milks. I've melted the butter in there and then added the milks on top of that, measuring as I went along, and then there's 1 fewer dish to clean. And I couldn't really tell the difference in the cornbread, if I'm being honest. I'd have to have them side by side. But there you go, that's cornbread batter. It's super easy. This is just a greased, I think this is an 8x8. It's supposed to be a 9x9. Use what you have. I honestly usually make corn muffins. My husband prefers those, and they're easier to portion. But I'm making a full cornbread in a square pan like this because I thought that a slice of it would look prettier in the thumbnail than a muffin. That's like really the only reason why. Otherwise I would make muffins. All right, taste your batter. Tastes good. And you just bake it in a 425 Fahrenheit oven for 20 to 25 minutes or until a toothpick comes out clean. And by the time the cornbread is done and ready to eat, these grains will also be done. Okay, we are fresh out of the oven. And if you're wondering what that noise is in the background, it's my greens. I have turned them up to boil rapidly because there was way too much liquid left over. You want there to be a little bit of liquid, so there's like a little sauce, but you don't want them to be like watery. So I'm just cooking it down really rapidly to reduce the extra water. And by then, my cornbread will be cool enough to cut into and eat. Okay, I'm gonna cut this into 6ths. See if I did a good job greasing the pan. Success. And there it is. I've done some calculations, and 1/6 of all of this food that I cooked is about 700 calories. So to me, that's a good meal. Your needs may differ. But the net result is I've made 6 servings of something. If I were a single person living on my own, that's basically lunch for an entire week. But as it is, it's more lunch for my husband and myself for about half a week. And it's relatively nutritious, it's delicious, and it's very economical. It's not very expensive at all. Let me have some of these beans. Yeah, I am not a fan of beans. I say this as someone who is not a fan of beans. These are delicious. And those greens, they have no right being that good. It's literally just water, bacon, and collard greens, and it tastes so good. You can dress it up with a hot sauce or vinegar if you want, but like honestly, I love it just like this. Man, it's so good. Anyway, I hope you learned something from this and got some ideas. And I hope you make this if you've never made baked beans before, or if you've never made cornbread before. Definitely change that. It's such an easy and rewarding thing, and it's so cheap. And I'll see you next time. Thank you to my patrons for making this and other videos on this channel possible, especially Britt, Honey Badgers, Megan M, Matthew, Jenny D, Jocelyn, Gina F, Megan B, Data Fox, Gina S, Ruth, Katie, Lonesome Screams, Mihir, Morgan, Beat Beppo, Britta, Veda, Anna, and Aditya.